we have Vanessa today. Vanessa's going to be our speaker, and she's going to be presenting on employee engagement. Is that correct? Or employee recognition. Sorry.
Employee recognition.
Recognition. Sorry.
You're fine.
All right. I'm going to turn off my camera. You can take over, and I won't mess up any more things.
No problem. I'll turn on my camera for a second. Here we go. Hello. Coming to you from Jacksonville, Florida. It's where I call home. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So I've been working with Microsoft technology since the first version of SharePoint and SQL Server and Microsoft's BI suite. So it's kind of first half of my career is really a lot in data, and then of course collaboration, and all the way up into 365. For the last 4.5 years, I've been working for a company called Druva as a subject matter expert, basically on data security. And it's really framed all around Microsoft's ecosystem. So I'm gonna stop sharing my camera, share my screen, and let's just get all settled here. Okay, let me share my screen. Let me know if you can see it. I think that's it. I just have a handful of slides. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. I have a handful of slides, and then we'll just jump into all of the various apps in this solution. So I kind of picked this mainly because sometimes when I'm doing like an end-to-end solution, it's easy to pick a certain type of thing, and employee recognition was always one of the things that I always built a lot of from one company to the next. So, and I find that employee recognition is kind of like both informal and formal. So some follow a formal process, some are just thank you, and others have different levels of appreciation, and there might be awards that are associated to it. But so when we're thinking about this, even from an employee recognition perspective, I always keep kind of a couple rules in mind. And the first thing is, even though we're talking about 365, I just like to tell people to be technology agnostic, because sometimes you find yourself building a solution, and your success with the solution might drive it to grow, and it might grow outside of the model of what's available in 365. Right. The other thing is there might be certain, I mean, as much as I love 365, I think that you have to be honest about whether you should be building something with this platform. I'll tell you, there's not much that you can't build. The question is whether or not you should be doing it, right? As we're going to go through here, you'll hear me talk about a lot of these things, right? Of focusing on the problem statement, the roles that are involved, and even all the way down to the pitch. How do I get this? If I need resources, how do I deal with that and get some additional resources? The other thing to always think about is the project isn't done just because I finished building something, right? There's long-term management, and you'll probably hear me say this a number of times, is that whatever you build, whatever you make, is you making a commitment for the organization, whether you're there or not, right? In a year from now, in 2 years, right? If that solution is done right, done well, and addresses the problem and provides the visibility that it needs and is easy to use, it might be around a while. And that means that you have a life cycle now that you have to deal with, that people might require change requests, that you might need to create training, that you need to build help and how for both the people that collaborate and that are managing it, and the people that are just adding additional information. So it definitely consider that it doesn't end. Now, with any problem with, especially maybe, I don't know, not necessarily with employee engagement or employee recognition, but there's always something that originates why. And usually for employee recognition, you find that There's been some HR survey where people are like, oh, there's not enough recognition. I want to recognize someone. And it keeps coming up and up. And finally, they're like, oh, let's just have our SharePoint team make us something because we don't want to pay for anything. That's one of the reasons, right? The other thing that we want to think about is what the flow is, right? That maybe you're transitioning something that came out of another system, or maybe you're transitioning and building an employee recognition that was done manually, and maybe manually is via an email. So you want to understand what the current flow is. And I like Visio. I've used Visio and mind mapping tools because when I'm doing requirements, customers are always better at helping to flesh out these requirements because they're more visual. It's hard with a requirements doc that's pages and pages long. So the more you understand where the current process is, that also then allows you to know where you can interject, what, as you redesign that or design that, um, as you're going through how you need to change it and what that looks like, right? So it's always a good thing to do. Um, as I kind of going through, these are just kind of like some of the tips and tricks, right? So when you're replacing this, and in fact, this happened with an employee recognition very specifically, is that sometimes during the process of something like the process of employee recognition, you might find that not everything needs to be automated. All right. And you have to consider what that automation of that particular step will do to your product, right? To what you're making. And that possibly steps 1 through 6, minus step number 3 is all part of the automation, but you can account for that step. So in each one of these things and where you are providing automation or integration, you have to think about what that impact is, right? How is that going to impact development, time, and even finances in there? Now, the data that we're going to collect, oftentimes we need to take a look at that data from a new perspective now, both in where we process the data. If I have a team site that's managed by just certain people, um, if I have a publicly facing site for right on my intranet, who can access this data while it's in process, and what the retention layer level is. Now, depending on I've built employee recognition. You might, depending on how big and how many employees you have and how well adopted it becomes, you might turn around and find that within a year's time, right, you're going to have 100,000 records in a list that you didn't plan for. So when you're doing that, understand what your retention needs to be. Right, that goes with asking the owners, the HR usually, what their reporting is. So do you ever have to report on last year? And sometimes it's a year over year. Sometimes it's summary data that they need. But at the same time, as you're building this out, you're going to want to understand what that volume of data is because you're going to need to deal with that from even an archival perspective, right? And then, of course, who has access to that data? Now, the process itself, right? You have the solution, the employee recognition. You need to understand too of there's a team that's involved in those roles, project sponsor, right? Who's on the project team, who's the solution owner, and then what they can do, what each and every one of these roles has the ability to do, right? What's their function? Now, I've started many a project where the solution that I'm making requires multiple hats. And maybe over time, right, it might be me and someone else. Or in the case of one of the larger projects I've done, over time, it actually, what I referred to as more of a program, ended up being a team of 12 people that managed this particular project. So even though you'll need to know and understand what Each one of these rules are. You want to communicate that, what your job is. Even an executive sponsor, it's as simple as everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing, especially if you're dealing right with the business. And the executive sponsor can ask, well, what can I do? And the simple thing is you need to help them understand what they can do. You can communicate to people to use this. You can use it yourself, right? So know what your team is. The other thing about this team is the more successful you are at building your solutions, the more you're going to be asked. And this is the opportunity that you also have to say, where are your strengths and where are your weaknesses and where you need help with. If you are not one that you want to do the requirements or train people, right, you're going to ask, you might be able to ask for a part-time SME or, sorry, a part-time person or a full-time person to come in and do a lot of that. So understand what those are, really document those types of things. And then for the employee recognition or the solution that you have, you do want to document the roles that are involved. What you do, this is everything about the solution. This is where I built it. What is it supposed to do? You know, what do you have? What forms? What flows? What lists? What accounts? What retention? You know, what the security model is, all of your documentation, because this becomes very helpful, whether it's for you in the future or even if you end up leaving the organization, you've got a place where you've documented this. And it also helps you from a troubleshooting perspective if, you know, a year goes by and you forget all the details of everything. So the documentation of how it's supposed to work and all the components of it, even your troubleshooting as you have gone through the development, that will help. I mean, I've had a customer call me I hadn't talked to in a few years, and they're like, "Hey, we want to add a column or something to this data set, and where is it?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, go to this URL," because I always had a naming convention for my project documentation, and try go here or go search for this, and sure enough, right, this was the documentation about all the components. So that's always helpful. The data, right? What you're going to see is when we go into this employee recognition, there's a lot of data that we're going to deal with, and that's being used all throughout the life cycle. Right? So know what this is, and then know where you're going to use this data. So I'm going to use certain things, certain pieces of data in email from a communication. I'm going to use it in reporting. I'm going to use it in my automation, right? And what you're looking at here is I can start a process with and collect 5, 6, 7, 8 pieces of data, just 8 that I'm having my user fill out. And at the end, without someone having to go fill out another form of any kind, I now have 30 pieces of data to use. And how does that happen, right? We'll also know where the source is. Where am I going to source this information? Now, I've done this for years, so I understand. I'm like, okay, yeah, anything. If I trust in the Active Directory or in the profile of data within your Entra ID, if I trust in that, I know where I'm going to go get things like department, office, and job title and everything. I am not going to ask users to fill in things that what my Active Directory or Entra ID has already. Now, if in fact, though, you don't trust in that data or it's not up to date and you need to ask the question, absolutely, choice columns as much as possible and without as many free flowing, right? So now we're going to get to just a couple more slides and then we'll just jump into this solution. So problem statement. I've done my requirements and I've interviewed all the different parties and I've built my flows. And from there, I want to carve out a statement. And this statement represent who's involved, what's the pain, are we saving time, are we saving money, and what is it that's been missing? And I'm going to make a simple paragraph. And in this paragraph, this becomes a business itself, the business owner, right, the project stakeholders, whoever else is involved, everyone should agree upon this statement, because everything you build from this point forward should always be checked against this statement. You know, am I solving this problem? Am I saving time and money? Am I fulfilling and making sure that both the that I have the right data for HR and leadership? Am I addressing security, right? And if by chance things change in a project, then this statement should change as well. This is a part of it as being kind of like a CYA, right? I think we have just a few more slides, but here's a pitch, right? I know that there's a solution of employee recognition. I may not have all the necessary um, resources. I may not be able to do it all. And I know I need to ask for assistance. I need to ask my boss. His boss needs to ask his boss, her boss, whoever's boss. One of my favorite ways of doing this was I learned this at a knowledge management conference. It's called a future state statement. So after I've gone through all these requirements and after everyone's all on board, what I did was I wrote an article about what the problem was and the future state of success and what we did. And it was an interview of like the CIO. And then I took it and of course, I used uh, Photoshop, and I put it in a fake news article for a periodical from whatever the town was, Salt Lake City. And I was like Salt Lake City IT News or whatever that was. So it looked real. I printed it and I put it on the desk of the CIO. And that was it. I didn't put my name. I didn't put anything. Someone just put it there. And they read that statement as if it was, wow, what's going on? What is this? And it puts someone in, like I said, a future state of um, the value that you brought with this thing that you're building. All right. The other thing that you want to do that you're doing in there is that you're helping people understand that you actually know what the problem is and you know what the solution is. So that's kind of part of this pitch. I try to keep those pitches really short and sweet after dealing with presenting on solutions, less than 10 slides if I have to try and sell a new solution like employee recognition, right? Okay, now we have some slides about the technology aspect of it, right? You've heard me say this early on. Right? What you build and what you design is you making a commitment for the organization you work for, or if you're a consultant, for the organization you're a consultant for, right? The supporting that solution, the licensing that's required. If there's an implication with storage, or if you need certain APIs that are monetized now, if there needs to be additional training. So always keep that in mind, and make sure that this is why you also have a test user. That's like a basic user. It represents the licensing of what your average users are. Um, I've gone into situations where someone has created an entire solution and they needed like a Power Apps 2 license for every one of the 5,000 employees. And they're like, no, that's not going to happen. They just didn't think about it. So make sure you put yourself in a successful situation by understanding what your organization is licensed for. If by chance you need something that is in, these prices are probably not even close anymore, but if you need something that's in an E5 and once again, have to present that message, right? Then you can do that. And it's the organization's responsibility at that point to say, no, I did not authorize that, or I chose, your leadership team chose to not do it. Whatever it may be, you need to be as transparent with this and know what you can develop in and under. The other thing in the development aspect across everything is, right, just because you can doesn't mean you should. I mean, it's simple. In almost everything you have in this platform, you have things that you can do out of the box. You have things that you can do with applications that are just tailored and customized, and then you have things that you have to fully custom, right? Build fully custom. And that could have a big implication on the long term, on the acceptance of that solution, on the long term adoption of that solution, on the support of that solution. Really understand that um, you want the organization to invest in your solution, your employee recognition, but absolutely, I think if you don't worry about it, if it's you that's still there, and you're representing that as an architect, uh, it will always be you that ends up being chosen to continue working at a project, right? So, yeah. And then a couple more things is design for scalability. As you build something, maybe it's one particular department that might need this thing, and I look at employee recognition of what we're doing. And sometimes that concept and the flow and the process, it could be a recognition, it could be a ticket, it could be a request. It's a little hard to mix and match that, but generally you want to make sure that you can design something that you could, if you need to grow into. So if your IT team said, I need an employee recognition, could you design just an employee recognition? Sure. But if you took a step back and said, why would other departments not want this? And maybe they won't want it now, but maybe they might want it in a year from now if they see exactly what we're doing. And if you consider those small little things as part of your design, you might be able to help yourself not re-engineer or have to re-architect something in a little down the road, right? So content approvals, any approval that we have, this is part of that documentation. And like I said, I use Visio, and oftentimes I pair this a lot with here's the flow that the user needs to approve, and they say, yeah, that's exactly what happens. But then also with how I'm going to communicate, whether it's in the approval that I'm going to embed data, or it's in an email that I'm also going to embed data. But I'm extremely fond of embedding the data in an approval or in an email. Early in my career, I used to always fight for people to go to a SharePoint to go see, what's theirs that they have to approve. And I realized that people they don't really care to go away from where they're working. And I just want the process to continue. So consider all the data that we need at each one of these that I want to communicate, because the goal is to get this record of employee recognition from point A to point B, and I'm going to communicate what I need. You also want to make sure that in that embedding of that, you watch out for sensitive data, right? That you're not sharing things that you shouldn't be. That you also can, if you are staging someone through something, they're stepping through stages, there's no need to show them data about future stages that they haven't dealt with yet. But it's okay to show them prior stages, right? Give them exactly what they need at that stage to make the decision, and right, they'll be able to not have to go knock on someone's door. The last couple slides that we have really is in the data visualization aspect. My first half of my career was really heavy into reporting and dashboards. So I always would design with reporting and data visualization first. And that's generally not often the case with people. But I feel that if you do consider that reporting and that aspect, you do a lot less data manipulation down the line right? Because you've prepared the data for exactly how you're going to visualize it. All right, we're going to cover all of these aspects. I think I covered this as just another one, right? Documenting the solution. Lastly, I just have some things to share with you just about, I want you to remember that you are in Microsoft 365 environment, and by all means, it is not immune from attack, right? It is happening daily. Your SharePoint, your OneDrive, all of that. So whatever you do, make sure that your backup teams are backing up your SharePoint regardless of what platform you use. I work for Druva, but we can always stand up against pretty much every one of the big names of like AvePoint, Rubric, Metallic. So it doesn't matter who you use, make sure you back up your data. If you guys haven't read the Digital Defense Report Microsoft puts out every year, this was released, it's like the 5th year. It was released in October. In that report, right, if you're focused on 365 or an Entra ID or anything on the Azure side, you should read that. It's a big report. I'm probably one of the only people that's read all the pages. But it tells you exactly about the threats, and it tells you about what threat actors are doing. I mean, who would have known that they love SharePoint as much as we do? And they love it for a lot different reasons, right? So know what the tenant is faced with, because you also need to wrap it with some good security. So understand what these things are, why it matters to you, why remote encryption means anything, and why is it that, what in the world is tech scam? And why in the world is it so many more millions of transactions over malware and phishing, which is what we hear about on a daily basis, right? Ecosystem, ransomware's up. Just remember that. Also, get involved with your cyber incident response team, right? If you are in a large enough organization, go to your security team and say, what are you doing to protect my instance, my 365? Remember, what you guys are building is you're building it on top of this platform, and you want to make sure it is safe and recoverable, right? Those are things that go beyond. All right, so let's go jump in to the platform. Right, there's a lot of components that we talked about. We touch almost on everything: SharePoint, Teams to manage, a SharePoint site to manage and hold the records, Power Automate flows, Power Automate or forms, right? Forms, Power BI, all of the above, everything. And so we're going to step through all of this. I it all depends on what you're storing in here, of course, but from a recognition perspective, I'm storing basically this core metadata. And if you're looking through this, and I only started this whole process with just a handful of questions, and we're going to take a look at this. We'll always come back to this. So this record may start with 5 or 10 fields, and it's going to continue to grow as it steps through its life cycle. And the life cycle in here, I probably don't have it in. Let's go see. Just to give you an idea. Oh, yeah. It starts out, it gets submitted, and then it goes to HR to see if that person is eligible for a recognition award. And if they are, then it goes to the supervisor to get approved. And then if it's a founder's award, it goes to the founder to get approved, right? So it goes on and on. So it all depends on the type of award. And this is what we're talking about from an employee recognition has to do with the fact that it starts off with some place that I collect the information, right? It doesn't matter where I'm collecting this. If I want to use a form, what it comes down to in here is you have different methods of input, right? You can have a form. Awesome. You can have a SharePoint form. You can also have a Power app. It ultimately just depends. I, for the most part, I like to use this form as much as possible, right? And the reason why, there's a couple of really cool things that I think so far still that it does. One is as I'm stepping through things, right? Sorry, here we go. So I might have in a recognition perspective, right? An all-star award, outstanding achievement, excellence, and a founder. So there's 4 different ones, but I have one field called award type. And then I also then turn around and I want to have a secondary choice, right? So if I pick an all-star, I'm only going to get an all-star choice. And that's a very simple thing, right? They're unique. But these values right here in this number 3, they will all write to the same column in my list, right? So they're all going to write to my, I think, award option, whatever that was called. Recognition something, award type. No, it's back here somewhere. one of these. It's actually writing to one column. So it has what's called branching. And I know SharePoint list forms are going to have branching soon. At least that's what they're saying. But there's pros and cons to each one of these here. I think I actually have this listed on my input options, so I can just talk about it. Yes, multilingual is a big one, especially if you're right multinational. You can print these. Awesome, great. You've got pre-filled options. You can also utilize the URL to pre-fill certain ones. Right, so there's a lot of things like that about using forms, just using the straight up forms. So you have absolutely different controls here, but you also then have different controls on the Power Automate side, right? About what Power Automate has and can pull from this. Now, the biggest thing that the SharePoint Forms has that I look at is it has the people picker. It's just a UI, a better UI for the list, right? No branching yet, no sections yet. But I think over time it might, it's going to get a little bit better. But to be honest, I look at this as being a security question too. Where do I want people to go? And the users, 99% of the users in the organization, well, don't even know this site exists. So I don't really want them going to some place that looks like a SharePoint list and they have to pop up a form, right? Whether or not you use Power Apps, that's all up to you. Remember all of those hats that you're going to wear, right? If you want to build Power Apps and you want to do that for every single list that you have, or you can make a custom Power App. You just have to remember if it's just you or you and someone else, you only have so much time, right? So just remember what you have to support. If it calls for it, absolutely utilize it. There's nothing wrong with that. It's an option, right? So that's the input. Now, when I write this data and I begin to step through it, the other thing I need to consider is, yes, I have version history on this record, right? Let me refresh this. It's stuck on a row. So yes, I might have version history on this particular record, but this record can change. It can be deleted. I've got no history of, if I wanted to go see the time between, I don't have that. So what I oftentimes do is I create this log and it's a separate list. And at the end of my Power Automate, which we're going to get into, at the end of every one of these steps, I just write a certain, not every single one of the metadata that I have in my employee recognition, but I'll write like what was the stage and status, what was the date, and this data can be used elsewhere, right? From an auditing perspective, I've got it. And I know exactly who did what, when, and now I could also then do time between each one of these rows. So I can actually look at it from a performance perspective and to say, where's the bottleneck or who's super slow in this particular stage, right? So one, I log things. Awesome. So let's go take a look at this. In Power Automate, you have options about how you build. Absolutely, you can build one big flow to run through employee recognition. You can build a couple different ones. You can one at a time. It just depends. For me, I'll give you some of the tips that I've had on these. This is the part too about remember that data schema. And if I remember that schema, I am going to get not just like the employee profile, but I'm also going to get their manager information. And this is the part where I'm going to start to be smart about utilizing data, right? If my user profile is clean and I believe in that data and it stays up to date, then awesome, then great. I'm going to step through it. Now, this is also where I'm going to run my process in here, and then I'm going to say, okay, if it's an all-star award, go do this, right? If it's not, awesome, then, go do something else. So however you design it, I've designed this a couple different ways where one, it was all embedded in one. So I step through my process. Once I receive it, I create the award, I create the log, I post the engagement, right? I'll post this and just a simple, whether I'm going to post in a Teams chat, right? So sometimes, depending on what you have accessible to all employees, whether you're using Viva or you have a company-wide or a team-wide channel that you're going to post in. Part of it just depends on whether you're using this. But what I've found, and I'm going to come right back to this, is, and assume by all means, this is not a homepage of an intranet, but just it's a site page. But I do believe that one of the best things that drives an intranet is people seeing things that are different and being able to engage. So yes, someone can go to Engage, to Viva Engage, or right, and actually see these old Yammer. Yes, they can go to Teams, but also your intranet is getting so much competition. You can embed this, and as if this is an automated process, and we think about adoption, and I'm building this in here, this is where a user is going to come in minus this left nav because it's a communication site that you're going to put this on, and they can interact, right? They're always seeing the newest things. You do this for employee recognition. You do this for anniversaries and birthdays, right? And sometimes you have to break it up. If it's a huge organization, you might have to do it by department. If it is a global organization, you might have to do it by country. But if you want to talk about collaboration and what drives people to an intranet site, and it also supports promoting the process of recognition, right, to recognize someone, you want to embed it where they can make it's easy for someone to gain access to, right? All right. So this is that part of it on the, as to why necessarily I have it post in here. Once again, if you're not using Viva Engage, or if you're using a company-wide chat, right, a channel or a team, awesome, that's public, you can do it there. So it's just the thing that it promotes and encourages interaction. So you're going to do this on all of these, and you're going to step through. So this is a process, right? The process, I put it in like this because I want people to see what's going to happen as it steps through. And as I'm doing this approval, this is where I'm now embedding some of the data that I've been able to pull out of this record, right? So as this record begins to build throughout, right, it's building, I can then turn around and use it in approvals, in email communication, and of course, right, continue to, right, then I'll continue to kind of like, I'll write back as an approver said something, or whoever approved it, I'll write those comments back into that list. That's me building on top of it. No, I'm not asking someone to go to a list and update it with their comments too. I'm just using this process right back, and it will continue to build my record, right? So in this case, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, something like that, new records that are coming in, or pieces of data that are continuing to build on that, right? So this particular stage, it's all about embedding in part of the approvals, building my metadata, and then of course communicating if it didn't get approved, of course. And then of course, if it didn't get approved, I still do the same thing. I write back to this record because I'm using forms, and that's over here. And because I'm using Teams and approvals, that's over here. And because I'm using, I still want to call it Yammer, and that data is over here. What builds and what's always up to date and always has the latest of everything is this one record that lives in SharePoint, right? So, all right, so we'll continue. So we've got our Power Automate, all the different steps. It's almost like it's the same concept from the next person. So HR eligibility, and then I'm going to have mine go to a manager, the person's manager, if it was HR eligible. And in here, it's the same thing. I'm going to say, I'm looking for a status. And then I'm also turning around and I'm saying, oh, I want to, if these things are in place, then go embed this data and ask for that approval. Awesome. I do have, in some cases, right, I might have to go back in, and I think I've built in like wait dates or pauses to say, hey, just go back and check after X days if they haven't done anything. So there's other things that you can add in here. But all throughout these, every step of the way, you want to, at the end of that record, end of that Power Automate, you want to always turn around and log it. And I'll show you over time like where this log's going to come into play even more so. So record is building, process is stepping through. I'm almost doing the exact same thing, but I'm using some different words because it's a different audience that has to approve it. And then I rinse and repeat, right? 1, 2, 3, approvers, great, build my data, manager approval, build my data. Yep, if it's a founder specific type of award, yes, right? So how you build this, whether you embed it all in one or you break it up, it just depends on what you want to do. I'm not going to tell you either way. Ultimately, everyone builds Power Automates a little differently. So, okay, let's go take, we've already looked at the log. We've already looked at this recognition. Let me make sure I step through. Oh, the other thing is, right, I've got this new recognition. I'm either going to put this particular page, if I'm embedding this in my intranet, I'll put it on like the HR employee site, or I'll create a site page in the root of the hub, and then I will put that link in a number of places. Right? You're going to want to either put it in your navigation, you're going to want to put it on a page that very specifically you tag that says new recognition because it's searchable, whatever it may be, and then you can put the process, right? This particular page, unlike a form here, this is findable. I can find this page, right? I can also turn around and share just this page. The form can change, but I'm going to always send people to this one URL. As much as I think it's easy for people to come into forms and be like, oh yeah, let me find it and click it, I also try and promote the utilization of embedding things within this intranet that also drive people to, whether it's a community site or your HR site or even your homepage, right, of your intranet. So let's see. Oh, this one is, I think, just the option. I think this was just the form option, basically, for you looking at what a form looks like in like the SharePoint list form. So it basically still just a SharePoint form. I mean, a SharePoint list, and you still have to deal with it. It's not as bubbly as the regular form. So you might, as I mentioned before, depending on your your Active Directory, your Enter ID, or your profile, right? Because sometimes you have hybrid, and sometimes people are like cloud native. If your AD is clean, then great, you can rely on that for things like someone's manager. But if it's not, then you can always extend it. Remember, if I'm going to go look up something, Vanessa's in this department and I want to go find the approver for that department. This is me putting this management in the hands of the HR team for them to manage it. So, even though you can bridge it with another list, I'm always fond of trying to make an initiative to clean up your AD because that thing becomes reusable everywhere, right? You might end up finding yourselves building this thing over and over, and you just you don't really want to do it, but you can, right? You can bridge a not very clean AD, right? Now let's go take a look at some data visualization. So I'm also fond of not making it, I mean, you can have a dashboard that looks like this, right? You can have it look like that. There's nothing wrong with that. You can also have it be an Excel dashboard. I just, I can use Power BI because one, I have license to, and I know how to build stuff in it. So if I were just to have looked at the data that I collected, the start date, right, the created date, the award type, the department, or whatever it may be, this is just data I collected. My views are limited. But because I took a look at my schema about how I want to report, remember, as part of the problem statement, there needed to be a view for executives and needed to be a view for HR employees. And you might have a view for executives that looks like this, for not executives, for like the management team, the HR team. You're like, oh, yeah, these are supervisor didn't approve this. More productivity based. And then you might have an executive view that looks like this, right? That it's embedded in more of a like a fluffy flow, or, I've done many of these types of things where it's just like here's the flow that I created, right? As part of my requirements, like here it's supposed to start here and go here and go here, and I can actually turn around and make that graphic in my Power Automate and just do my counts. So you have a number of ways to visualize the data. The biggest part of that is knowing the type of audience that you have. If you're looking for someone, if you're dealing with process and someone needs to troubleshoot, having one that really steps through the actual process to say, oh, there's 5 that are in that ended here. There's 5 that are in this date. There's 34 that finished. Awesome. Right? And of course, you might have filters in here by year, by whatever. Know what the audience is. Power Automate is, Power BI. In a lot of ways, it can be easy, but then in a lot of other ways, it can be very complex. And remember the whole point about what hats you're going to wear. If you're good at this, if you're not good at it, then ask, a finance person to help you with creating an Excel dashboard or something like that. But in for adoption and to drive adoption, one of the biggest ways you drive adoption is with a good visualization, right? And especially when you're looking at one of my favorite things, and what you find is when you roll out employee recognition, it never fails. It's always like 1 or 2 departments that are over the top, they use it. And then you find over here that the IT department doesn't use it at all, or is very limited usage, or some, right, the majority of departments. But in order for this product, this solution to take hold, you need to give the views that tell the stories that you need to tell. And so if you need to tell the story to the executive leadership that these departments are not doing a very good job of recognizing their, each other or other employees, then make that view, right? If you have success, if you have the different types of recognition and which one's more, what you find about these other types of recognition is it allows your HR team to ask the questions of, oh, why don't we have that? What can I do? Like if I need this to be better, what is it that I can do to, encourage that? Like what is that? So the visibility to employee recognition will help drive the adoption. Right. So we've talked a lot about this employee recognition, right? From managing it in teams to how I'm going to collect the data, how I'm going to extend the data, and then process that data step by step and grow my schema. And then, of course, how I'm going to visualize that data. And at that point, when you're looking at it, you've got a solution that, ultimately, especially where recognition, I always find that recognition is one of the easiest things to roll out in a company. You have competition with these apps nowadays, but there's just no point. I mean, it's not rocket science to go through recognition. And you want to build your repository, right? Your catalog of successful solutions as a developer, as an architect, as the worker bee for the only person that does anything on 365. And doing this with employee recognition will help you do that, right? It doesn't have to be too complex, right? All right. So I know we're at time, but I'm happy to answer any questions anyone may have. I can go look to see if anyone's asked any questions. No questions. Anybody? Sean, Charles, Steve, Jonathan?
Everyone's microphone's enabled if anybody wants to jump in.
There's no bad question. Wrong
Hey,
question.
hey, Charles.
Hey, so first and foremost, thank you for this session. I've actually built an employee recognition system, and I think you gave me some insights that I had overlooked during that. But I guess my question would be, with you going through this and having some best practices, what's been the biggest lesson you've learned as far as what you should have known that was like the biggest, I guess, egg on your face?
Yeah, it has to do with the damn processing on Power Automate. That's part of it, is that I always lock things out for people to change. Like they can't change the schema, um, but it's in as I step through the process and the use cases that would come up. That I think was the biggest thing in how I wanted to design these Power Automates. Um, I think that's where I have adjusted. Like I said, I've broken it out before like this. Um, and I've also designed it all internally in one. And that was so painful because a recognition could take 2 days and it could take 3 weeks. It just depends. And I never like leaving. I like it when a flow starts and stops, completes, and it runs and it completes, or it runs and it fails. So that's the biggest thing. Let me think back here. Um, and probably because I've done this so many times, almost exactly like this in this model: log, list, Power Automate, extend, dashboard. I think for definitely a lesson learned would be um, this, I'll just tell you, you can, if you have this dashboard, um, and I'm publishing it because I publish it in a team and I have it go and I have it basically sync every hour, right? It's syncing and refreshing. So if I do that, everybody that's in this team looking at this dashboard has to have access to that, which means they need a license. They either need it, right, an E3 plus a Power BI, or they need an E5 or an A5 or anything like that, F5 or G5 or any one of those fives. Um, so I have done ones where I've published the dashboard because I'm not necessarily, I look at it and like, okay, I'm not doing names. I've actually done that um, public publishing of a dashboard. It's like publishes this dashboard into this weird la la land where no one can really look for it or find it, and you need this URL. And I'm like, because they didn't want to pay for it, but the value of it. So you're like, okay, I'm just going to publish this with a back end service. And I've done that. That was interesting. I just needed to make sure that if someone left, I republished it and changed the URL. So there's always little workarounds of getting around licensing sometimes. Let's see. Um, taking on, I don't mind Power Apps. I am not a developer. Where Power Apps is concerned, I've built all kinds of stuff and I can hack my way through this. This is why I say it's really important for you to know what your strengths and your weaknesses are and where you want to grow in here. So I chose to grow more towards the data than I chose to grow in Power Apps. So I ended up spending more time on Power Automate, right? Forms and employee like Power BI versus doing a Power Automate. So I'm like, I could work around anything I needed to. I know you could do a lot of things. So the only thing I tell people is you just remember what you'll have to support in a year. If in a year's time all you're doing is trying to keep up with the 10 apps that you built last year, and you have to keep updating those or fixing those, you have to really just watch it, right, on what you have to kind of manage. Um, I think, and document it. as painful as documentation might sound, in a year from now, it might really help you. Like, what are the names of your flows? I also have a different account that I use to run it, right? So I'll create I have a service account like for HR. Hopefully you're working for a decent sized company, and this company is going to HR. I have as they have their own processing account that's going to automate all their HR processes. So that's an account that I use. I log in and I'll create those and I'll run it with that account. And that account is licensed, right, to do certain things. So I've done that and I like that because then it's not running by any one user. If this process is supposed to go on and live, I try to design things to live beyond me and my place in that company. So if I'm not there, something shouldn't break, right? That's a big thing. So um, department type or process type accounts, and that should be part of your consideration. Someone says, well, how much does it cost? And you're like, oh, I'm going to build this dashboard. I'm going to use this, and I need a license of an E3. So $27 extra a month, right? So something like that. I took a long time to answer that question, I feel.
You gave a lot of context. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All
Yes,
right,
Sean.
Sean, I'm going to Sean. There we go.
Great job. I love how you brought together all the primary and ancillary services, for that matter, of 365. Had a question about the potential to maybe nudge those people that haven't provided any recognition in some time. Can you maybe architect something, at least in discussion, within Power Automate that might facilitate that?
Yeah, so that they haven't, yes, absolutely, you can do that. In your design of your Power Automate, like so what you want to do is, where did that go? This guy. So when you're doing this requirements, you want to ask that question here with the business stakeholders to say, if they haven't, right, there's a yes or the no, and then you need to know time. How long should it sit at this stage, right? Because that's where you can have a counter. That's where you can add a pause in a particular thing, right? That's where you can wait, and then you kick off just another email to say, hey, this has been sitting there. So make sure that that's just part of your requirements process, and then you just build it in. Whether you build it in inside that, or you build it in to a separate process that says, oh, I'm going to go iterate through my list and see if there's anything in this particular state. And I'm going to look at the time. And if the duration is X, then I'm going to go send an email to that owner, or whoever, whatever state that's in. There's a number of ways you could do it. But find out how long it should stay there. And this is where the log also comes into play, right? When you're looking at that, even in your management of the data, is that I can bring in the data, and it's hard to see it here, but I can actually, there's a couple really great in Power BI, or you can even do this in Excel, that shows you what the time is, right? So if the SLA or the expected time should be X, from start to finish, that's something that you also want to put back on the owners of this process, because they want something to get through and be done as fast as possible. I will say too, there's one thing I didn't cover in here, and that is, how do you get other people to do this? And one of the things I've done is, in addition to putting data, something on here or in an intranet page to say, hey, it's almost like the first couple of months of a recognition, you have a competition. The best department or team, or the person who has the most number of recognition, or the person who gives the most recognition. You're like, I want to post it on there. And this is where you get your marketing, your HR team to say, can you give me 5, Starbucks gift cards, great. And you're going to turn around and you're going to say, okay, you can, your HR team can give these out to people who recognize people. And that becomes a competition because someone can say, what? You got a gift card for recognizing? You're like, yeah, I got a gift card for saying thank you. So you also put things like that in, where did that go? I put that on some page somewhere. Where did that go? No, not that one. On this, right here. On the page that you are driving people to kick off, whether it's a form like this, like I've embedded, you can put it in here, a little chart. Whether you want to manage it manually or not, there is still a chart, and like you're going to go update this like once or whatever, but there's like there's a little chart web part in here, and you're like, and you can look at that, and you can so you can show people who's the leader, right? Top department recognition, whether you're doing it with an Excel part or you're doing it with I wouldn't do it with an embedded Power BI because not everyone has Power BI, but right, get people to see that there's activity, that others are doing it, and that becomes also part of that kind of like that competition itself. And especially when they see that in the beginning someone wins a gift card for saying thank you, they're like, what? Right. Yeah, did that answer your question?
It did, yeah, thank you.
Awesome. All right, Jonathan, we're gonna put you on the hot seat. I know you have a question. I feel it. I feel you have a question.
I'm pondering.
Let's see. I'm trying to think. Well, yeah, there was a reason why I did this. I forgot what I was like. Why did I have that guy up there? And I was like, oh. The other thing I'll add to this employee recognition is that at the end of a process, someone gets recognized, right? And you can have a site where it's the employee spotlight, or you can have an employee recognition site that shows, hey, I want to feature somebody, right? I'm going to feature this person in here. I actually built this Power Automate flow where at the end, and just gives you an idea, someone can actually kick off this manual workflow. It was a manual workflow. This is one of my favorite ones I did, and I don't think I have it in this dev site, but they were able to kick off this, and if it was approved or if it was whatever, it actually went to the site that I created a template. And in that template, you see how these little things right there? It says my profile, right? My office profile. That's John Smith, all that stuff. I think I have let me go look at this template. I'm going to show it to you because I actually created a HTTP. I created a record using HTTP, and I basically replaced, I'm like, oh, go create a record in an intranet site and replace this with the actual employee name from my list. Replace this, right? Whatever it was, I actually created it and laid it all out. And what it did was it did about a 90%, 95% creation of this record. And then I sent an email to the manager to say, hey, your spotlight page for this person has been created. So the biggest thing I look at that is in line with extending this data set from 5 or 6 fields to 30 is that I want to have people utilize this site, utilize the features of a site page, because I think that's great. That's what drives someone to, really good content. And if I can take this and publish a site page, 90% of a site page, and then have that HR person go and finish the rest, they go pick whatever pictures they want. Those are all types of things that you can do. it took me a minute to get that one, but man, once I did that one on one of the last one, it actually worked out really well because you just, when you finish a process, the last thing you want is to go tell that HR guy, you now need to go copy and paste all this data, right, to go create a site page. So there's other things you can do outside of this to extend it, but you can be pretty creative with it.
And Vanessa, just real quick, when you said the HTTP, you're talking about the SharePoint HTTP request using the REST API?
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. And all it was, and I'll find it and I'll send you I'll record something and I'll send it over to Jason. Maybe he can share it out with you guys. But ultimately, what it comes down to is you have a site and in there you create a template. I created mine in a site pages in a folder. And all I'm doing is I go copy this from the template, knowing depending on what type of employee recognition I got, I'll go copy the template back to the site pages. And then I go and get that record and I'll replace it with the metadata. And then by doing that, and I'm replacing this metadata as well. So I already know that in this particular thing, I replaced the LinkedIn URL from my data set with this guy. Right. So there's all kinds of little things like that. But what I found that this one drove that adoption, and then it just makes it look so much nicer. And because you build out a whole site with content that I didn't even have to create, that the process creates.
I don't know why I've never thought of that.
Right? I'm telling you, it's just like I got there because it came down to the complaint of, do I really have to copy? I'm like, how many times have you been emailed that content? How hard is it to copy and paste? And so, right, you sit there and you're like, fine, there's got to be a way I can do this. And I just started with copies of ones that were filled out. And then I'm like, oh, but then I found this post and it probably took me like 2 weeks to just bang my head against the wall trying to figure out these small little things. I probably have it in here. Yeah, this employee spotlight here. I think this is it. I have different tenants, so I hope this is it. I know we're over time here, but might as well.
No rush.
Yeah, there we go. So I went and I took this particular site page and then I got the metadata. I checked it out. I saved it as a draft with my data, right? Because I called my list. I says like, I'm getting the data from whether it was a form or whatever. You can do this from a form. I've done it from a form and I've done it from a list item. Save it as a draft. And when you do, when it looks at that page, right? Because you're basically going to this template page and you're getting this code. It's a very specific piece of code. I know this is the perfect audience for it, but ultimately, you're going here and you're like, no, not that one. It's this guy. It's like the developer tools and you're getting this particular chunk of code. Maybe I'll do that for the next one. How about that? Your next month, I'll go through this one. And then you're replacing it with that metadata that you have from your form or your list. And then I update the properties, I check it in, send an email, I publish it, and then I post it as news. And you're like, what? And then they can go do whatever, right? You have to get to this point. You have to get to the save, like update the file properties for them to see the draft version, at least. Whoever has to go finish it. I've done it where someone's finished it, right? They like I said, 98%. And then the other ones where I've literally, this model where I took it from a form, it was like same concept, but it was called I have an idea. And then the idea gets published as, right, there's like so many different types of ideas. Someone has an idea of they want to bring, instead of dogs on Friday, once a month, they want to bring their cat or whatever it is. Doesn't really matter, but it's like I have an idea instead of employee spotlight. So, but you can use the concept for anything. You turn a list or a form or just some input, and you turn it into a page, site page.
Yeah, it's
very
pretty
interesting.
cool. Yeah. I've done similar, but with like Word documents. So just putting the placeholders in the Word documents. Like right now, I'm working on something with a certificate, but I never thought of doing it this way with a page.
Right? I was like, and I'm sure that whoever wrote that original post, I was like, I don't even know what I'm doing here. But it was painful. I will tell you. I probably helped someone get through this a lot easier, a lot faster. But maybe we'll do this some other month. We'll go through this particular thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. We can either be done or we can put Steve in the hot seat. Steve, you're the last one. Trying to think if there's any other questions anyone ever asked.
So I may have missed it, but so you had that values column at the end. Is that basically dynamic data storage? Is that what you're doing there?
Which one?
Right there, the very last visible column there.
Oh,
Values.
values?
Yeah.
Challenger. Oh, let's see. Values. Let me see what I did with that. What's values? Values could be. Oh, it was a choice.
it's
I
just a
think it
choice
came.
value.
Yeah, it came straight from. It was a multi-choice. What it is, in a form when you're doing a multi-choice, so you can have a single selection or a multiple choice.
Yeah.
And so what I did was, I think when I run into that, I usually write it, and then what I'll do is I'll have a calculated column that actually looks at that, and it says, if there's change your mentality, then give me a 1 because I want to count it. Right? So that's usually what I end up doing. I'll create a calculated column that would look at these choice questions. And then it's like, oh, I want to see a count of things because these multiple choices, they're hard to deal with on the data side. So you have to manipulate them. So I'll write the record, but then in my list, I'll say, oh, if it's change your mentality, I'll have another column that says change your mentality and it's a 1 or a 0. And if it's like, oh, if values contains change your mentality, give me a 1. If it can, and then, the next column I have is customer first, because in the data visualization aspect, you need counts. And sometimes in this case, like in this, if I want a count of just all stars, I need to just count all stars, and I choose to do data manipulation as much as possible, if I can, on the list instead of in the Power BI. Because if I do it in the list and someone exports this list to Excel, they have the right set of data. They have the set of data I used instead of me creating all these manipulations in here and then showing all stars. So, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Make the report as dumb as possible.
In a sense, like you make the report as dumb as possible. I mean, I've done some really cool things on dashboards. Like this one, I'm telling you, whenever I do processes, I literally take the Visio, I save the Visio because you can save Visios every single slide as a JPEG or whatever, PNG, and then I'll make that the background of a dashboard. This has been when I've done like deep processes, because it reminds. I made them sign off on this to begin with. They signed off on it, so it's their process, and they can easily see where something is stuck, and if I need to click to it, I might click to that supervisor, and it might take me to a view of just the actual lists of ones that were for just the supervisor or something like that. So, yeah. I don't use them a ton, but I still definitely use calculated columns in here because I think that you can still do a lot with calculated columns. I'm like, why not?
If it's
So
there.
if it's there, still fundamental, basic things, right, in this world. So, all right.
Cool.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining and asking questions. That's great.
All right. Thank you so much for presenting this month. And if you still have the link, feel free to toss in another submission and we'll queue you up for one of the upcoming months.
Yeah, absolutely. I will. Absolutely.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Well,
You're welcome.
all right. Thanks, everybody. I guess we'll catch you next month. We have the next speaker listed on the meetup site, so feel free to take a look at that and RSVP for that one. All right. Thanks, everybody.
All right.
See ya.
Here.